Anterior and posterior, sorry, these are really technical words. All kinds of strange ways. That is a very complicated, terrible description. Oh shit, that's quite loud. Turn it down a little bit. Let me just have a quick check to see if there was anything else. No, that's it. Yo, what's going on guys? Rhys here from More Than Lifting with the More Than Lifting podcast. Conversations about calisthenics, bodyweight training, gymnastics, all that good stuff. I'm Rhys, personal trainer from the UK and founder of morethanlifting.com, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the two different types of pull-ups. Alright, before you start worrying, you haven't been doing pull-ups wrong your entire lives, it's alright. We're just going to be talking about the two different types, anterior and posterior, or hollow back and hollow body for ease. I'm going to just use those four terms interchangeably throughout this thing, so just a heads up on that. And yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's what we're going to be covering, so let's get into it. This is going to be a bit of a short episode because there isn't 1,000 things you can say about pull-ups really, but it's really important to know that these two different kind of types of pull-ups, I'm hesitant to say variations because they're not really different variations, they're actually two different movements, but two different types of the exercise. So yeah, so don't get confused with that. It's not just like you can only do arches or wide grip pull-ups and that's it. It's totally different. You can do wide grip and arches of both of these types of pull-ups, so it's pretty impressive. But yeah, first, the last episode with Michael, oh my god, how much insanity was that about handstands. Sorry for the audio quality. I find that when I have other people on, I always end up like screwing the audio somehow. It's just a pain in the ass trying to record both people, especially when someone's on the other side of the world. But it wasn't that bad, I don't think, and hopefully you got enough out of it for it to have been worthwhile anyway. Anyway, oh man, I really need to get more people on actually to talk about stuff because it's just, it'll end up being a lot longer. And I miss having Chris on, so that was good times when it was a co-host. But anyway, that's a bit by the by. I've been doing loads of like extensor wrist training for my hand, my wrist, because it's still giving me trouble. It's not nearly as painful as it was, but I saw this physio who used to come up gymnastics. Jason, if you're listening by any chance, like shout outs to you. Thanks for giving me these exercises to do and help build it all up. He's a physio from around Brighton, and yeah, really top guy. So thumbs up for that. Yeah, so that's what I've been up to anyway. And yeah, so right, two different types of pull-ups then. So what's that all about? You haven't been doing pull-ups wrong, like I said. In fact, to be honest with you, I'm a bit naughty and I tend to just be biased, so I tend to do more of one than another, when you should really just do a bit of both. I guess you shouldn't really be too overly worried about this. It's not like you're going to have some major muscular imbalance and you got to start training all over again from day one just because you've been doing one type of pull-up and not the other. You know, that's not going to be a problem. But anyway, so anterior pull-ups and posterior pull-ups, or hollow body pull-ups and hollow back pull-ups. Posterior is your back, that's your hollow back pull-ups, and your anterior, your front, is your hollow body. All right, and they're kind of just used interchangeably anyway, and that's because I don't think there's just like a decent name for either of these types of pull-ups. It's kind of like single bar dips. So single bar dips, you can kind of do them two ways. You can do them where you stick your legs out and you come round the bar and come down kind of the side of it. It helps you get a lot lower. You can kind of, these are kind of more similar to muscle ups, and you can basically get as low as you want until you tap your chin with the bar, and then it's really just a battle of keeping your elbows above it. But the other type is more like a push-up, where you kind of keep your hips roughly where they are, and instead of just going down round behind the bar, you stay on top of it and you kind of lower yourself forward down towards the bar, kind of like a push-up. You know what I mean? So that is a very complicated, terrible description. It's hard to kind of explain it just through words, but luckily these pull-ups are a lot easier, which is why we're going to be talking about it. And so you see people doing pull-ups in all kinds of strange ways, all right? But there are only two ways to do it. You either do it with a hollow body or with a hollow back, and it just varies with people's discipline and technique over how good they look or how effective they are. And we've spoken about different levels of like exercise discipline, of like full range of motion and stuff like that before. So I'm not going to go really crazy into that, but basically these two different pull-ups. So when you see most people doing pull-ups, they'll either be looking up at the bar and have their legs kicked out behind them, or they'll have their knees up in front of them and bringing their chest right up to the bar, okay, kind of like a muscle up. And these are the two different types, okay? So it's either looking right up at the bar with your back arched, which is your hollow back, or it's with your kind of shoulders almost rounded over and your legs sticking out in front of you a little bit, or your knees, and you're pulling up in front of you into your chest, and that's the hollow body, or the anterior. Okay, and these anterior and posterior, sorry, these are really technical words, but basically they're just, yeah, like I say, your anterior chain is what it's referring to, is the kinetic chain that gives you your front fold. So anything bending over, I think crunches, leg raises, stuff like that is all anterior, working your core, and your posterior is your back, the back half of your core. So your all your lower back muscles, mid back, and everything that kind of does the back bend. And you also have three other types of kinetic chains. While we're at it, I might just tell you them all. One of them's intrinsic, which is all your insidey bits. You don't need to worry about that a lot of the times for training, although your diaphragm's obviously very important, your breathing, isometric breathing. Then you've got your deep longitudinal, which is like left hand to right foot and right hand to left foot in like a big cross across your body. And that's what's responsible for just walking and running, general movement like that. And then lateral, which is like moving sideways, lifting sideways, walking sideways. That's all lateral movement. Yeah, so those are those 5 kinetic chains. We're not going to talk about that again. Sorry to overcomplicate it, but that's just so you know kind of what muscles you're activating when you're doing these different types of pull-ups. Your anterior, your front, is being activated when you're doing anterior pull-ups. So that means your core is being brought into it, your hip flexors often, and stuff like that. Whereas when you're doing your posterior pull-ups, your back and your posterior chain, that is not really going to be activating your core. You're going to be really just focusing on those back muscles, your rhomboids, your lats, your infraspinatus, and your lower back muscles especially get a good workout. And even your hamstrings, if you're lifting your legs up, sometimes you might even get cramp in your hamstrings. So if you're going to be doing these, then definitely stretch them off first. That's a big mistake people make. Kind of when you do hanging leg raises, and when you're getting used to hanging leg raises and different like L-sit exercises, a lot of people get cramp in their quads and their hip flexors and stuff like that. So when you're doing these kind of exercises, always stretch your legs off as well, and especially around your hips, because this is a very important part of your core that people just forgets even there a lot of the time. So think, oh yeah, stretch my core, and then even if they stretch their core, you know, it's really important to do, so you should be doing that, guys. Anyway, so the basic argument between these two, like why I'm even talking about this, is that when you do anterior pull-ups, which is what a lot of people do, and if you've done the programs, it's basically all I really get you to do a lot of the times is anterior pull-ups, sorry. And what a lot of people say is that when you move like this, your anterior chain lights up, your core, especially when you're up towards the top, bringing your legs out in front of you slightly. And this is like bad times, because that's the opposite of your posterior chain, and that's really what you should be doing with your pull-ups. And that kind of makes sense, but the reality is they're both kind of activated. They're both being activated anyway. It's not like all your lower back muscles are like having a rest, putting their feet up while you're doing your pull-ups, because it's not the case at all. And at different parts of your movement as well, they're being affected more than they are at other parts of the movement when your anterior chain, your front, is being lit up, you know, your abs and your hip flexors. So it's not just a cut and dry thing like that. But then another thing that people say is, also, when you're doing these posterior pull-ups, you're keeping your rhomboids and everything contracting nicely because you're pulling your chest high up to the bar, you're looking up high, and it allows all of these back muscles to really pinch and close up together, really contract and squeeze as much as they can. Whereas when you do anterior pull-ups, that kind of switches halfway up. So you start contracting, and then as your anterior lights up, your anterior chain lights up, your core and your hip flexors, your back starts to stretch back open, because you're reaching and you're pulling the bar down into your chest. You're coming around the bar as opposed to directly up to it. And what this does is this creates eccentric contraction, which is when your muscles are squeezing but they're stretching. Yeah, which is a good and a bad thing. Like, that's not really the issue, but what is not happening is you're not doing a full contraction necessarily of your back muscles. So people also say, oh, that's kind of bad, you know, and Sometimes, my opinion is, it doesn't matter that much. Yeah, yes, you can argue that it does matter, but it's really on a person-to-person case. If you've got quite a strong back, then you probably don't need to worry very much. But if you're working up to that level, then you might need to think about these two and think about what order you should do them in as well. And the reason I say this is because your hollow back, your posterior pulls, where you're looking up to the bar, and you're pulling straight up, so your elbows go directly down and behind you, and your chest comes really high. When you do these pulls, the movement is very similar to bodyweight rows, which is literally the exercise before pull-ups, like the stage before. All right, we've talked about this in the beginner's tri-set and the foundation tri-set, some of the earlier podcast episodes around episode 30, 31, 32, something like that. So go and check those out to learn more about that stuff. I'm not going to go crazy into it, but basically it's the level before pull-ups. And in this, you're under like a lower bar, like a dipping bar, and you're in like a plank or like an upside down push-up position, pulling up to the bar. Okay, so here you're under the bar looking up at the bar, and you're pulling your chest directly up to the bar. So the movement is very similar to the posterior pull-ups, whereas with the anterior pull-ups, with the hollow body ones, because you're coming around the bar, the movement itself is different to your bodyweight rows, so it tends to be a bit more difficult to learn. And that's why a lot of people struggle transitioning between rows and pull-ups, and it becomes very difficult because they're doing a different movement compared to, if you were just working those posterior pulls, you would probably be a bit more successful. It would probably be easier for you to learn. Think of how your negatives would be. Think of how your isos would be, your iso holds. Think of how all your progressions would be if you're just coming up to the bar. It's exactly the same movement pattern as you were doing with rows. All you're doing is changing the loading. So it's very similar to weight training in that sense, and it would make it a very easy transition. Whereas doing the others, you have to change the movement completely. So now you're pulling down and then back instead of just straight through like you would do with your hollow body. So your anterior ones, think of it like I said with those two dips. So if you were doing push-ups, and then you move to those single bar dips, it would be easier for you to do a single bar dip, which is more like a push-up, than it would be for you to do the single bar dip, which is more like a muscle up, because the movements are totally different. If you were doing push-ups and then progress into dips, it would make sense to do the ones that were more like push-ups than ones that were totally different, because you're going to have more success with it. It's going to be easier for you to develop that strength, and then you can move on to the other version and have more success with it. It'd be easier for you because you've built up that strength. It's not the strength that's the problem, it's the actual movement pattern, learning to move in that way, and that control and coordination. All right, you've already built the strength, which is what we're really working on. So that's why it's important to know these two. And going forward then, it's not like you're limited with variations on either of them really. You can still do arches, you can still do one arm kind of. I mean, I don't know, you don't see a lot of like hollow back, like posterior one arm pulls. Would it be easier? I don't know. I guess you can't use your core, so it might be quite a bit harder. There must be a reason. Anyway, you can still do your typewriters, you can still do your wides, your close, or your grip changes, chin-ups even, like all this kind of stuff you can still do. So it doesn't really matter which one you're doing and which one you're pursuing in terms of progressions and variations and stuff. But when it comes to taking it to the next level and learning muscle ups, you need to be doing these anterior ones, because otherwise you cannot get around the bar without kipping. If you're pulling straight up to the bar to your chest, you can't go any further because the bar is literally hitting your chest. You can't go any higher. Whereas with your anterior, because you're pulling the bar around in front of you, you can get around it and on top. Okay, so it's important to, as you get better, if you've started with those posterior ones, those hollow back, to move onto the anterior for your muscle up progressions. All right, so that's really it. I mean, how much more can you say about pull-ups? I don't think very much, to be honest with you. Guys, that is it for this episode. Hope that has cleared up a little bit about these two different types of pull-ups and how to use them in your workouts and your progressions and all that good stuff. And we even learned a bit about dips, which is cool. So that is it for this episode. If you like what you heard, give us a subscribe, share us with your mates and training partners, and if you're feeling particularly generous, then go over to iTunes or Stitcher or Google or wherever and leave us an honest 5-star rating and review. Wink wink. Let me know if you've done it. Just give me a message on Instagram for some just fun and a chat with me, and I will catch up with you in the next one. If you do want to reach out to me with any questions or anything, find me on Instagram at morethanlifting. Just give me a direct message and we can have a conversation. And otherwise, I'll catch you in the next episode in a couple of days. And as always, keep in touch with yourselves.